So to start off, how would you define the ministry's role when it comes to ending violence in close relationships?
My ministry is working with prevention and prosecution of crime. And we also have the legislative role when it comes to crime. So for my ministry, violence against women is a big issue. And the work against violence against women is located in the police department in the ministry. And my ministry is in charge of a cross-ministerial group because we have been assigned by the government to coordinate the government's work against violence against women. And this cross-ministerial group has been working since the year 2000 and consists now, these days, with 8 ministries. And it's the Ministry of Health, Education, Labor, Social Affairs, local government and regional government, and the Ministry of Agriculture. And you might ask why the Ministry of Agriculture is involved in this, and I can tell you it's the connection between violence against animals and violence against people. Because we find, we have researched the last years, this shows that violence against animals and violence against people are closely connected. So since the year 2017, the Ministry of Agriculture has been part of the work, which we find very good because then it broadens the field better. And this cross-ministerial group is working on action plans, usually, and we are using action plans as tools to coordinate the work better. And right now, we are working on an escalation plan against violence against women and violence in close relationships and violence against children. And this plan is going to be launched, I believe, in 2023. And it's going to build on the Istanbul Convention. If you are familiar with, yes, it's a European Convention on violence against women and violence in close relationships. We are going to build the escalation plan from the government on the 4 Ps from the Istanbul Convention, which is prosecution, prevention, protection, and the last one, integrated policies, which is taking into account the need to coordinate the work closely between the ministries, between the local government, between the regional governments.
You mentioned an escalation plan. For our viewers, could you just clarify what exactly is that?
Well, you could also use the word action plan, but when you are using the word escalation plan, it normally means that the government will put into an amount of money in it with the measures. Of course, we have some resources when we are making action plans as well, but sometimes the action plan can come without resources. But an escalation plan, the most common thing to do is to get resources to fulfill the measures. And as an example, I can mention the escalation plan on violence against children, which was launched in 2017 and which will was finished last year. I guess we had 1 billion Norwegian kroner from the government to that plan. So I don't know if we will have 1 billion for the escalation plan on violence against women and violence in close relationships in 2022 or 2023, but we can hope that the government are serious when they say it's going to be an escalation plan. So, but 1 billion, we cannot promise that, but I guess we can. We are expecting to get money to fulfill the measures.
So before we move on, Norway uses the term violence in close relationships instead of gender-based violence or violence against women, which is more well-known internationally. Could you maybe explain why that is?
Well, I would say that in Norway we are more pragmatic. We have gender-neutral legislation in this field in comparison with, for example, Sweden. They do not have a gender-neutral legislation. They have violence against women in the law. We don't have violence against women in the law. That's one part of it. The other part of it is that in the beginning, we also said, in the beginning, when I say in the beginning, I mean like in the 70s, we said violence against women. Then this field developed. We understood after a while that women, of course, are more subjected to domestic violence than men. This is, we don't disagree on that one. But violence, domestic violence also covers same-sex violence, it covers violence against children, it covers violence against elderly. So by using the word, the concept violence in close relationships, we include all these groups. But of course, Norway have got critics from the CEDAW committee, which says that Norway underplays the role of the this gendered violence. So we always are trying to say that, okay, our intention is to include more groups, not to downplay that women are more subjected to domestic violence. This is, of course, not everybody agrees about using the concept in that way, but this is what the government has decided, that we are going to use the concept in this way. So that's why. I don't know if that's a good answer, but it's actually the answer, yes.
Yes. How long have we been using this term? You say that there was a development. At some point we did use other terms.
That's quite easy to tell, because the first plan of action, which came in 1999, or 2000 I would say, was called Violence Against Women. And the second plan of action, which came in 2004, was called Violence in Close Relationships. So from the first to the second plan, we knew more about the field. We knew more about what is domestic violence. So we decided then to try to include more groups, and that's why we changed the concept. So easy, maybe, and so difficult, yeah. But we decided to try to include more groups, so that to, for example, ask for help. It should not be if you are subjected to domestic violence, you are a woman. If you are a man, they are subjected to domestic violence, you would maybe the threshold to come to the police or to the shelter should be higher, because this doesn't happen to men. But even though it's clear for the Norwegian government that usually it's the women they are subjected to domestic violence. Look into, for example, the homicide statistics. When partners are killing partners, it's men killing women. It's not very, very seldom women killing their husband or former husband. So we know there's a pattern here, which is where women are more subjected, yes.
So I understand that coordinating measures and policies is a big part of your work, but why exactly is coordination so important?
Because when you are subjected to domestic violence, you might, or very often, be in need of services from many different actors. Like, you need protection, you need help from the police, and maybe from the shelter. You might be in need of health service, you might be in need of social service, you might be in need of services from the child welfare. And when you have been abused or you have been subjected to violence, you might be in a very vulnerable position. And to be vulnerable and then be told that, okay, you can go there to find services, they can help you, should be for many victims of domestic violence very hard. So we believe, no, we don't believe, we know that when the services are coordinated and working comprehensive, this would ease the situation for the victims. So we have some, actually, to take coordination to another level. We have created some projects where you put all the services under one roof. So the victim can come to one place and all the services will be in the same place. We have not so many projects in this direction, but I believe this is the direction which we are going to go further on. Like in the Oslo Police District, we have this project we used to call the Project November, which is now a part of the work of the police district, not longer a project. And it's an office in the police where they have child welfare, social workers, psychologists, and police in the same building. So when the victim come there, it's possible to report to the police. It's possible to get treatment from the psychologist. It's possible to talk to a social worker, maybe try to find a place to live if you have to move away from your partner. So it's coordination is important to be able to serve the victim in a better way than we have done before, because we have come quite far in Norway by specializing our services to the victims, but as long as they are not coordinated or working comprehensively, it should be hard for the victim to have to walk around to find out who is going to help me with that. So that's part of the importance of coordination. But coordination also is about the ministries, because the ministries are in charge of directorates, which are in charge of regional services, which next is responsible for the municipalities. And if the signals from the ministries are not coordinated and comprehensive, the different services will have different assignments to dealing with violence. But we are trying then to work together to ask the directorates to work in the same way, to treat the victims in the same way and together with the other services. So coordination is important in all the levels of, and of course, especially at the municipal level, where the victims actually live and actually need services every day.
You actually touched upon it, and you did mention examples. I was going to ask you who are the most important stakeholders in this field. Is there anyone else you'd like to add? You know, you mentioned the different ministries, the services.
Maybe I didn't say anything about the NGOs, but the NGOs, of course, are important as well. They are both giving services, and they are doing campaigns, and they are an important actor when we are making action plans, for example.
How would you say the role of civil society has changed from, you know, a few decades ago until today? How do you cooperate? How is that organized?
We are cooperating quite closely with civil society, but I would say that their role was, I would say that the first shelter in Norway was opened in 1978, and that was not due to the ministries. That was due to the very hard work of the women's movement, from the shelter movement. And after the 80s, the 90s, the government has taken more and more responsibility in this field. And I believe that the role of the civil society has been not that important, but it does not mean that they are not important. But as the government has taken more of the responsibility, they no longer have this responsibility on their shoulders alone, because the government has now said that violence against women is not a private matter. It's a matter for the government, it's the matter for the Ministry of Justice and all the other ministries. But these days, civil society is playing, as I told you, a big role when it comes to like making action plans, like making this escalation plan. We invite them to meetings to come with what kind of measures do we have to put in, what's the status right now, in your opinion. And we have this forum, which is a forum for civil society and the ministries, and we meet up every half year, not the last 2 years due to the pandemic, but we meet up every half year, and we are discussing issues which the civil society wants to discuss in this field of domestic violence or violence against women.
That kind of brings me to my next question, because in order to develop targeted responses and measures, we need information. So I was wondering if you could tell me a bit about the knowledge base. Like, how do we collect data and information on violence in close relationships, and then how is that used in policymaking?
Yeah. Well, we're collecting data from different sources. Of course, we have sources like sources from Statistics Norway, which every year have studies on living conditions in Norway, and one of the questions are if you are subjected to violence. And we have statistics from the police, and we have statistics from health. We have statistics from child welfare. But I would mention, if we are going to talk about some kind of best practice from Norway, it should be the research program we have been running since 2014. Because to work good or to work targeted with this issue, we need to know, first of all, the extent. We need to know more about, how our measures is working. Is it the campaigns we are running? Are they working? Are people coming forward? Because what we see and what we know is a lot about the dark figures when it comes to domestic violence. A study from 2014 told us that approximately 25% of women subjected to domestic violence come forward to the police, which means that 3 out of 4 never tell the police. Some come to the health service, some come to the shelters, but we know that there are still a lot of people out there who are not coming. Why are they not coming? So we have research trying to find out why are they not coming, what's the extent, how does the measure function, what is the causes, the root causes to violence they are looking into. And one of the actors, because we have 2 big research institutes doing this program, and one of them, which is called National Competence Center on Violence and Traumatic Stress, they are doing this study now to look into the extent, the same study they did in 2014. So it's going to come now in 2022, and we will then find out what was the figures in 2014 and what does it look like in 2022.
Do you have any examples of how research has informed policymaking and led to changes on the ground?
Well, for example, we have 2 studies, one on restraining orders used by the police, and one by this electronic monitoring, also used by the police to the protection of the victims. Both these studies show that the police is not working, well, I could say not working good enough with these measures. So both these reports are sent to the Higher Prosecution Office and to the police. And the assignment from the ministry is look into this and try to make changes.
So speaking of research, a lot of studies do show that violence in close relationships can affect anyone regardless of their background, but we also do know that certain groups are more vulnerable than others. For instance, we know that the broader context of discrimination against Indigenous peoples can make them more vulnerable and less likely to seek protection. So I'm wondering, how does Norway work to protect its Indigenous population?
Oh, that's an interesting question, because first of all, I would say that in Norway, we, as far as I know, we have only one indigenous group, which is the Sami people. And maybe 3 years ago, we did a study on the extent on violence in the Sami communities, violence against women. And what was actually found was that Sami women was subjected to violence, I guess, maybe double as much as non-Sami women in the same geographical area. This is so-called Sami Nord study, which has been conducted now 3 times, and it's kind of a study on living condition on Sami people in the Sami communities. And then, together with the Sami Parliament, the Ministry of Justice started to work on this issue. And in the action plan, which was launched in August 2021, the Sami people, or violence and abuse in the Sami communities, for the first time got a separate section in this plan. So actually, I believe we now can say that we are working very good with both the Sami community and the research institutes to find measures to combat and prevent violence also in the Sami communities in a better way than we have done before.
So we also know that economic and social emergencies often lead to an increased risk of violence, most recently exemplified by the coronavirus pandemic. So how can we ensure that policies during emergencies don't have negative consequences for victims of violence?
Well, I would say that also in this, I'm now talking a lot about this action plan from August 2021, but also in this action plan we have a separate section on emergency due to the pandemic, as you said. So we discovered very fast that we didn't have plans that included violence in close relationships when it comes to an emergency. But by this plan, we now have some measures to include violence in these plans. So I believe we are now, hopefully not for the next pandemic or next emergency, but we are better prepared for the next time, I would say, yes.
In terms of the pandemic, do you have any concrete examples of policies?
Yes, I would say that it took some time before we understood that it could be very dangerous for, not some time, it took maybe a week, where we actually understood that for victims of domestic violence, children and women mainly, it should be very dangerous to be locked in by a perpetrator. Not by a perpetrator, but they were locked in with a perpetrator. So maybe after a week or so, the government decided that, for example, the employees at the shelters, they were defined as essential workers, which meant that they don't have to go to work, but they could go to work, and the children could go to the kindergarten, and the children could go to school, even though other children could not go to the kindergarten and other kids could not go to the school. And the same for police officers, which were working on domestic violence. They were to be strengthened in their work, because now we suddenly understood that this could be dangerous for victims of domestic violence.
Strengthened in what sense?
Strengthened in a sense that some police officers had to be reorganized to other action in the police during this period. But these groups, they were going to work only with domestic violence, because we were afraid that this was going to be a rise during the pandemic, which actually we have not any figures to support in the Norwegian context right now. So we don't know if that's due to that people have not come forward to tell about it, or if it actually was a decrease during the pandemic. We don't believe it was a decrease, but still we don't have the numbers to support a hypothesis that it was more domestic violence, like we could see from the rest of Europe. So it's we don't understand that quite well in the Norwegian context right now. So we have to find out more through research, for example.
So talking to you, violence in close relationships is obviously a complex issue and it needs to be addressed on many different levels. But are there any specific policies or measures that you'd like to highlight?
I believe the implementation of the Istanbul Convention in the Norwegian context has been very important. And back to the 4 Ps we were discussing in the beginning, like the protection, prevention, prosecution, and integrated policies. To have the policies into these 4 pillars I believe is the most important thing we can do in a Norwegian context as well. Because actually we have to prevent better, we have to prosecute in a better way than we do today, and of course we have to protect the victims. We still have a way to go to protect in a good way. Like I told you, we have the police is not working exceptionally good with restraining orders. They are not following up all the places. We are not using the electronic monitoring possibility as good as we could have done. And when it comes to prosecution, we actually prosecute, but still we lack proof in some cases. We are putting cases away because maybe it's not domestic violence. We have to work better on all levels of prosecution. And when it comes to integrated policy, we have been discussing the efforts to coordinate, to make comprehensive services. So we are striving to work with more quality in what we are doing in the 4 Ps, if that's a way to say it.
Would you say that we're moving in the right direction?
Well, I will say that, yes, but we are walking very slowly, but we are walking in the right direction, yes, I would say that.